But in general, sir, we do support this legislation.
I call the honourable member Jan Logie. Tēnā koe, Ms Logie.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker. I'm pleased to rise and take a call and offer the Green Party's support for this, the second reading of the Veteran Support Bill. I'm not, however, as pleased as I would have liked to have been, as not all the issues we had hoped to see resolved within the committee have been resolved. But clearly, the 40,000 veterans with qualifying service and their families have been waiting 7 years since this was first referred to the Law Commission, and, you know, it seems about time. And the 1954 Act clearly needs updating. So for those reasons, we are absolutely supporting this bill today. It is time for some resolution. It is time for families to be able to move forward. The Law Commission made 170 recommendations for updating the Act. The government has accepted 132 of those recommendations. And during the Select Committee process, we heard very well-informed submissions from many presenters on issues of a technical as well as a more fundamental nature. The basic shift of this bill is that it will make changes to the administration and decision-making processes, provide a greater focus on rehabilitation and enabling provision of services to better meet the needs of elderly veterans as well as those of modern day and future deployments. Changes have been made through the committee, and I would like to acknowledge the committee and presenters for the process that has brought this bill back to the House, even with our reservations. And I do believe that we all want a system that appropriately acknowledges those who this country has sent to war. And I share the, I guess, slight bemusement from Labour colleagues about not understanding really why the threshold wasn't taken out of this. And I have not heard from the government a reason that makes sense to me on that. I'm a pacifist, and the Green Party is founded on a principle of non-violence. And after watching the incredibly moving film last night, Field Punishment No. 1, I can't help but reflect on the pointlessness and brutality of many, if not all, wars, and how much better it would be if no person ever picked up arms. The film, which I really think everyone should watch, showed how during the First World War conscientious objectors from New Zealand were sent to the Western Front and tortured for refusing to become soldiers. It also highlighted the brutality of war and reminded me that soldiers are real people, members of our communities and our families, as well as being members of our armed forces. The images we saw last night reminded me of the stories we heard from submitters who have been in our armed forces, and all were even the children of those in our armed forces who told us of lives irrevocably changed by war. And even in the case of the children, how when their parents didn't get the rehabilitation or psychological assistance that they needed, the damage that was caused to them through that experience of war were at times passed on to their children as their homes became war zones, as their parents lived out that post-traumatic stress in the home. And we also heard of years of battles to get help and struggles for recognition. Battles and struggles with the same state that sent these people into places that caused them harm. You don't have to believe in war to want the best support for people who have been through such horror. Which is why the main points of contention I have with this bill, as it has been reported back, is that it doesn't go far enough. It doesn't pick up the Law Commission recommendation and the recommendation of many submitters, including the Royal New Zealand RSA, that all veterans with qualifying service should be eligible for the veterans' pension. It seems to me that that policy would have had several advantages. It would have simplified our system and removed some of what we believe is unnecessary conflict that exists within the system as it is at the moment. And while that may sound like that's triggering dollar signs for people, as has already been noted by the Honourable Phil Goff, the cost of that in the first year would be $11 million, and the cost is projected to decrease in $8 million in the year after. That does not seem like an insurmountable, unbearable cost for this country to bear. And if the fear is possible costs as a result of more conflicts in the future, well, we would hope that this would be another thing to consider before entering into a conflict. If we can't afford to recognise people for the cost of going into those wars, then we really do need to second guess our decisions to go. The primary advantage as we see it would be that it would acknowledge the debt of the state to our veterans. Most people serving in the armed services are not there to go to war. They are there for many other reasons. If the state does send them to war, I believe a debt is owed, regardless of the degree of injury. The second point that we are unresolved over is the portability point. Again, this elicited a large number of submissions asking this House to uncouple the portability arrangements for the veterans' pension from superannuation rules. It was submitted that the veterans' pension is earned in recognition of a duty to the Crown by way of military service, putting veterans in harm's way, and not by living in New Zealand for a specified period of time. Again, the Royal New Zealand RSA expressed concerns that there were many New Zealand military veterans, particularly Pacific Islanders, who were otherwise entitled at 65 but did not qualify due to residency requirements. The counter view to this was that the majority of veterans living overseas reside in countries with which New Zealand has a social security arrangement, therefore they are able to access the pension. Of course, of those in places without an agreement, the majority at the moment live in the Cook Islands, and New Zealand has just announced a change to this arrangement. So veterans wishing to retire in the Cook Islands, Niue and Tokelau will be covered. But the Law Commission also noted that in their review, the major concern regarding portability was for those under superannuation age. And this bill does resolve that issue by instating a veteran's weekly income compensation that doesn't have a residence criteria. With that all said, and both sides, we still retain concerns about any future conflicts and entitlement for people who wish to retire on other Pacific Islands, for example, Tonga or Samoa. We believe the principle, and possibly more importantly, the symbolism of entitlement holds a meaning beyond the financial benefits of the pension, and we would have preferred to uncouple the pension from superannuation to ensure all qualifying veterans were entitled regardless of where they live. But these 2 points are really our only sticking points with this bill. And again, we want to acknowledge the need to update the War Pensions Act and improve the processes for veterans. War and armed conflict is a horror and a failure of humanity that we should do everything in our power to avoid. And when the state fails to avoid war, the state has a particular responsibility to those who pay the price of that failure with their health and their freedom. With respect to the human frailty of those who end up fighting, the wars created by political leaders, and in the knowledge that this bill won't in any way make going to war more attractive, we wholeheartedly support this bill as the least our country can do to acknowledge the cost of being asked to kill another and putting your life and body on the line. We recommend it to the House.
I call Alfred Naro.
Fine.